All right, so there's this viral video making the rounds that's making a pretty shocking claim that India's entire foreign policy has suddenly taken a very sharp and maybe even dangerous turn. In this explainer, we're going to do what we do best. Break down exactly what this source material is alleging, slide by slide, to piece together the story it's telling. So, the whole thing kicks off with a real head-scratcher. You have this act of friendship, a naval exercise. Then, just 2 weeks later, a deadly act of war. And what follows? A really puzzling silence. This is the central mystery that the video wants us to try and unravel.
Okay, let's get right into it. The entire story really hinges on one single dramatic event that took place out in the Indian Ocean. Just take a look at this timeline. It's pretty wild. On February 17th, we see the Iranian warship, the Iris Dina, participating as a celebrated guest in an Indian naval exercise. The Indian Navy even tweeted #BridgesOfFriendship to welcome them. But then, fast forward just 2 weeks, and the source claims that very same ship was attacked and sunk by a U.S. Navy submarine. And to make things even more intense, the video cites a former Indian foreign secretary who says the ship was probably unarmed because that's usually the protocol for these kinds of friendly visits.
And the human cost here, as laid out in the source material, was just awful. We're talking 87 Iranian sailors dead. And while 32 were rescued from the water, the video points out a really critical detail. The rescue wasn't carried out by the nearby Indian Navy. It was Sri Lankan forces who ended up answering the call.
So, what was India's official reaction to all of this? Well, the source highlights a single 3-word tweet, supposedly from the ruling party's account, that just said, "Not our business." I mean, talk about whiplash, right? Going from bridges of friendship to not our business in the span of 2 weeks.
Now, to make any sense of this incident, the video argues that we really need to zoom out. Because this wasn't some isolated event. It was actually a single flashpoint in a much wider and rapidly escalating conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran.
Yeah, the source is basically saying this wasn't just a stray torpedo in the water, it was a deliberate move in a much larger conflict. It paints this picture of a full-blown shadow war, alleging thousands of US and Israeli strikes inside Iran, and then retaliatory missile attacks from Iran and its allies on US bases across the region.
And this is where that global conflict starts to hit home for everyone. The source claims Iran responded by shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, which is a vital artery for global trade. You see, a full 20% of the entire world's oil flows through this narrow channel. For a nation like India that relies so heavily on imports, the video calls this a nightmare scenario.
So let's get back to India's reaction, or, well, the lack of one. That official silence is exactly what the source material finds so controversial. It argues that this represents a complete break from India's traditional foreign policy.
And really, the video's whole argument hangs on this contrast right here. Historically, it claims, India practiced what's called strategic autonomy, a policy of not taking sides even with its own allies. You can see examples here with past leaders from different parties. This history is held up right against the current situation. Alleged silence on an attack by one partner, strong condemnation of another, and even a public thank you from Israel's prime minister for taking a side.
This apparent shift has led to headlines, which are cited in the source, asking a really powerful question. In this new geopolitical landscape, has India's independent voice just been lost?
But according to the source, this isn't just some abstract geopolitical game. It argues that these international policy shifts are having a direct and painful impact right here at home, especially on India's economy.
The video really highlights the nation's energy vulnerability. I mean, with 55% of India's oil coming from a now-threatened Middle East, the big question becomes, what about the strategic reserves? The source points to conflicting reports about how much oil India actually has stockpiled, and that creates a deep sense of uncertainty about the country's energy security.
To really underscore its point about lost autonomy, the source highlights this quote from a US official. It's about a temporary allowance for India to buy Russian oil. The official is quoted as saying the US has given India permission, and the video seizes on that specific word, permission, to frame the whole debate around national sovereignty.
And this is how the source connects all those high-level geopolitics directly to your kitchen table by linking the energy crisis to a reported 60 rupee price hike for a standard cooking gas cylinder.
This all leads to the final and most provocative question that's raised in the source material. Why? Why has this fundamental shift in India's foreign policy allegedly happened?
Now, the source is very clear that what follows are theories coming from opposition leaders. It reports their explosive claims that the Prime Minister is compromised and is being blackmailed by the U.S. And the alleged tool of this blackmail? A major corruption case in the U.S. against a key Indian industrialist. So the ultimate accusation is that India's foreign policy is being driven not by the national interest, but by personal leverage.
And so, the source material leaves us with this one fundamental question. Is this a savvy pivot to a new strategic partnership in a world that's constantly changing? Or is it a dangerous loss of the independence that has defined India for generations? That is the core debate this video puts on the table.